Welcome to LEXperts Smarter Fleets. In this episode, I'll be talking to Marc, Head of Insights at Autotrader, about how costs influence your choice of vehicle.
Autotraders is a great big brand. About 10 million people use the platform every month. We observe all the things that those 10 million people do, and that gives me access to an enormous amount of data about why people make the choices they make and what's happening in vehicle markets. And there's probably never been a time like it. There's more going on right now in the car industry and the van industry than there has been probably since it started.
Definitely. The thing that keeps me awake at night is these electric vehicle residual values. So what are you sort of seeing at the moment and from an EV residual perspective?
At the moment, it's a different story to actually what we've seen over the last few years. If we rewind to middle of 2022, residual values where EVs were quite high and pretty stable. And then we saw a big change in 2023. By the end of 2023, we'd seen prices drop by around a third. It really reset the whole market. But in the last couple of months, we've just seen an uptick in values. And our read on it actually is, in most simple terms, but to supply and demand. And it's been rapid.
Yeah.
That's probably the thing that's really surprised us, certainly. I don't know if it's filtering through order books and things like that, whether they've seen an increase the last couple of months.
Yeah, we watch it daily like you do. I mean, we've got, across my entire fleet, we've got over 250,000 EVs. So, we really, really watch this closely. When I'm looking at a lease, you might have a customer say to me, well, we're going to buy, brand X because it's 30% cheaper than brand Y.
Yep.
But of course, from a leasing perspective, that's not the only thing we need to consider, because if the residual value of brand X over brand Y is half the value, then of course you're not going to see that new price reduction feed into your lease rates. And something that, thankfully, what we're seeing in the last couple of months, I agree entirely with what you're saying, is we're starting to see those values first stabilise and now actually increase as those used car buyers, who aren't really the leasing kind of market, they're actually turning to EVs. When you're paying $190 for a litre of diesel, and you can charge a 200-mile range car for a few pence, it makes people think a bit more. Yeah, and of course that will hopefully mean I can set residual values a little bit stronger and bring those lease rates down.
Back in 2019, there were about 45 brands selling new cars in the UK. By 2030, there might be 100. So choice has gone absolutely crazy. How do you go about picking that apart and working out what the true cost is for some of those new brands?
Yeah, it's a great question. The only thing my customers are interested in is cost, but ultimately it always comes down to pounds, shillings and pence. So having to keep that perspective at all times is the number one priority. So you've got to look at total cost of ownership. You're going to have this car 3 or 4 years. You're going to cover 50 or 60,000 miles. So you need to think about how much is the fuel going to cost around that car, how often is it going to be in for servicing, how reliable is it. So the whole cost element is not just the purchase price of the car. So if you've got a car that's off the road, then you've got to hire a car, you've got to organise public transport, you've got to miss meetings, miss sales opportunities, whatever. So then you've just got the broader context of how reliable is this vehicle going to be, what kind of infrastructure has this manufacturer got, and actually from my perspective that's the thing that matters most. So the other thing we can do now is, of course, a lot of these new entrants won't have a fleet team. They'll need someone like Lex to come along and help talk to the customers. We're in a great place to have a really good view of the whole market and help a fleet manager or an HR director or a finance director really work out how do you navigate through all this, and what might look cheap on one metric over the whole period of time is not cheap. So there's a whole education piece around that TCO, total cost of ownership dynamic, that isn't just the lease rate or the depreciation or keeping the car on the road. So never gets easy, but that's what we're here for.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, though, was the role of insurance. Insurance obviously is a big chunk of an ownership cost and a running cost of a car. How do you navigate all of that sort of stuff?
We can help because we've got a lot of data. We can kind of really prove what's the propensity for damage, what's the propensity for claims, and cost of those claims.
If I go back a couple of years in this transition, there were lots of stories that cost a lot more to insure an electric. What's happening with that? Is that a truth? Has it gone away? Or
in my sphere of vision, it's really not that big a difference. I think what I'm actually seeing through my data is an EV driver is far less likely to have any kind of incident than a non-EV driver, predominantly because all of the EVs have got the latest tech and the ADAS systems, and they are helping to prevent the small incidents. Most incidents are small bumps.
That's interesting.
I hope you found this episode interesting. Look out for more episodes on the LEXperts Hub.